To keep the thread, I would like briefly to return to what I said here a week ago about the soul atmosphere we need to consider if we are to cultivate a relationship between physically embodied human souls and disembodied souls in their passage between death and rebirth. This atmosphere is what unites the living with the dead, so that a relationship can exist between them. Initially, we saw that certain inner moods must exist in the living for a bridge to be created with the realms where the so-called dead exist. Inner moods always, in fact, indicate the presence of a certain element of soul. And we can say that when this soul element is present and reveals its existence in appropriate feelings in the living, the possibility of a relationship with the dead arises. Then we also showed how this possibility, the soul atmosphere, is created by two tendencies of feeling, one of these being a sense of universal gratitude toward all experiences in life. I also said that the human soul generally relates to its surroundings in a subconscious and a conscious way. We are all aware of the conscious aspect, which involves directing our sympathies and antipathies, along with our ordinary sensory observation, to whatever we encounter in life. The subconscious aspect, on the other hand, involves us developing a subliminal feeling that is nobler and better than those we can usually cultivate in our ordinary mind. It is a feeling we cannot describe in any other way than by saying that in our deeper soul we always know we should be grateful for every experience in life, even the smallest thing that happens to us. Difficult experiences in life may be painful, but if we survey existence from a broader perspective, even painful experiences will allow us to be grateful, not in our conscious mind, but in our deeper soul, for the continual gifts that the universe gives us. There is a real subliminal sense of this in the human soul. Now, the other aspect is that we unite our capital I with every being or creature with whom we have had anything to do in life, even inanimate objects as well. But whenever we do something that involves us acting upon and connecting with another being, a residue of this remains and forms the foundation for a lasting connection or affinity of our being with everything we ever connected with. I have said that this deeper feeling of affinity, of which the conscious soul is usually unaware, is the basis for a deeper feeling of commonality with the surrounding world, a sense of community with it. We can live with increasing awareness of these two feelings and bring them to expression, a feeling of gratitude and a sense of community with the surroundings with which we have, in some way, been karmically connected. We can try to raise into awareness what lives in these feelings, and the more we do so, the better able we are to create a bridge to the souls currently living between death and rebirth. The thoughts of these souls can only find their way to us through the medium of the feeling of gratitude which we develop, and at the same time we can only find our way to them if our soul learns, at least to some degree, to cultivate a real sense of community and commonality. Our capacity to feel gratitude toward the universe, the fact that we have practiced engendering such gratitude within us and are capable of feeling it, creates a mood which offers the dead a path to reach us. And to feel that our being lives in an organic community of which it is a part, as our fingers are part of our body, makes us mature enough to feel gratitude toward those, too, who are no longer physically embodied, and this feeling in turn allows our thoughts to reach them. Having first acquired the capacity to feel gratitude or a sense of commonality in a particular area of life, we can then use these feelings in specific instances. But such feelings are not the only ones. There are many other such subconscious feelings and subliminal moods of soul. Everything of this nature that we develop in our souls builds connection with the world in which the dead exist between death and rebirth. A very specific feeling which always exists subliminally in us, but can gradually be drawn up into our awareness, accompanies gratitude. It is a feeling humanity has increasingly lost as it embraced materialism. Yet it remains there in our subconscious to some degree, and even the most extreme materialism cannot eradicate it. Yet life is enriched, enhanced, and ennobled when we draw such things up into our awareness out of subconscious realms. The feeling I am referring to could be described as universal trust in the life flowing through and beside us, a trust in life. It is extremely difficult to cultivate this sense of trust in the context of a materialistic outlook. Similar in some ways to gratitude, and accompanying it, it is nevertheless a different feeling. Trust in life means that an unshakable mood exists in the soul, that whatever life may bring us, it always brings a gift, and that whatever this may be, it will never be worthless. Certainly we suffer and meet very difficult experiences, but in a broader context, it is these in particular that most enrich and strengthen us. This continuous subliminal mood is one we can try to raise up a little into awareness. Life, one can say, you lift and sustain me, and ensure that I gradually progress. If a mood like this could be cultivated in the education system in some way, a very great deal would be gained. To found our teaching on this sense of things, allowing such a mood to inform our whole education system, showing in specific instances that we can trust in life precisely because it is often hard to fathom, would be of great significance. You see, if we consider life from this perspective, by asking whether it deserves our trust, we discover many things that otherwise remain hidden. I don't mean the superficiality of finding everything in life absolutely marvelous. On the contrary, in certain cases this trust in life can lead us to a severe critique of idiotic or pointless things. It is when we do not trust fully in life that we often avoid criticizing things that are idiotic or misguided, because we try to ignore or overlook what we can have no faith in. I am not speaking here, therefore, of blind trust in everything that we encounter, for of course we trust more in some things than others, depending on their different nature. I am talking rather of trust in life in general, in the inner coherence of life. If we can draw up from subconscious depths something of the trust in life that always holds sway there, this starts to enable us to really observe the spirit at work in life, the wisdom of destiny and inner guidance. This is not a theoretical insight, but one must really feel that the way life shapes itself and presents me with things, the way they affect me and are related to me, is something I can trust in. And then gradually we are preparing ourselves to really perceive the Spirit living and working in the world. If we do not have such trust, by contrast, we close ourselves off from this Spirit at work in all things. This also has an effect on the relationship between the living and the dead. By developing this mood of trust, we enable a person who has died to find the way to us in his thoughts. On the currents of this trust, as it were, our thoughts can sail to him. If we cultivate a general or universal trust in life, a faith in life, we can create an inner state of soul that allows thoughts sent to us from the dead to appear in us as inspirations. Gratitude for life and trust in life, as I have described it, belong together in a certain way. If we do not have this universal sense of trust, we cannot gain trust in another person that is strong enough to reach beyond death, but instead have only a memory of once trusting him. You have to realize that feelings which are to reach and affect those no longer in physical embodiment have to be somewhat modified from those we send toward people still inhabiting a physical body. We can certainly trust a person living in a physical body, and this trust will also be of some benefit for conditions existing after death. Yet such trust has to be strengthened by a more general and universal trust, since after death the dead person lives in different conditions. Above and beyond remembering the trust we once had in a person, we also need to keep re-enlivening our trust in a being whose physical presence is no longer there, to awaken our trust. To do this, we have, in a sense, to shine out into the world something that has nothing to do with physical things. And this universal trust in life that I have described has nothing to do with the physical world. In the same way as trust and gratitude belong together, so the sense of community, of shared commonality, is accompanied by something always present in the subconscious soul that can likewise be drawn upward into our awareness. Again, this should be considered more than it usually is, and could be so if it played a greater part in our educational system in this materialistic age. A very great deal depends on this. To relate to the world in the right way at our current stage of evolution, we need to develop a quality, or you might say draw it forth from the undersoul, that people naturally possessed in former times of atavistic clairvoyance. It was once there quite naturally and did not have to be cultivated. Only scanty remains of this can still be found and are gradually waning, like everything else human beings once possessed in ancient times. Nowadays it has to be consciously cultivated, through knowledge of the world of spirit, rather than by vague instinct. The quality I am speaking of here is the ability to keep refreshing and renewing our feelings for everything we encounter in life. We easily grow weary from a certain age onward, losing our living engagement with life and failing to find joy in its phenomena. Just think of the difference between how a young person in the first flush of youth experiences life and the weary way an old person meets what it brings. Consider how many disappointments a person may have had. It makes a real difference whether someone is able to keep reviving his powers of soul and renew them each and every day in his soul, or whether he grows weary as life continues. It is extremely important to consider this nowadays, and could have very important repercussions in our education system. In such respects, we are approaching a significant turning point in humanity's evolution. Our history, which is just a fable convenue, gives us a very warped view of former epochs. People are unaware of how in recent centuries children's upbringing and education has increasingly become something that fails to sustain them in the right way later in life. In current circumstances, at most, our educational efforts in youth leave us with only a memory of something. We recall what we learned, perhaps, and what was said to us when young, and usually we make do with that. But in doing so, we entirely fail to consider that here, in particular, a vital secret affects human life. On a previous occasion, I referred to this secret from a different angle. The human being is a complex entity, but an initial view of him ascertains a duality, as I mentioned on a previous occasion here. And this comes to expression already in our physical form, the head and the rest of our body. So let us firstly see the human being in terms of the head contrasted with the rest of the organism. Just considering this distinction in the whole edifice of the human being would lead to very important scientific discoveries. In purely physiological and anatomical terms, we can see the structure of the head as governed by materialistic Darwinian lines of descent. As far as our head is concerned, we are part of this evolutionary stream of physical lineage, but only in respect of the head and not the rest of our organism. To understand the nature of human descent, you have to picture the rest of the organism as an attachment growing from the head, despite the relative size of the two parts. You can picture the continuing course of evolution in these terms. As we evolve into the future, various organs could acquire further distinct organs attached to them. Evolution could continue in this way, and this is how it was in the past. In ancient times, we existed only as a head being. This head developed increasingly and became what it now is. And what is attached to the head only came later, despite being larger in physical size. It is younger, a more recent development. As far as our head is concerned, we derive from the most ancient organisms, while the rest of us came later. This is also why our head, at our present stage of evolution, is so important, because it recalls our previous incarnation. And in this sense we are a dual entity, the head being quite differently constituted from the rest of the organism. The rest of our organism, as I have often said, is a preparation for our next incarnation. In this sense we are a very divided being, and the head is quite different in nature from the rest of the organism. The head is an ossified organ. If we did not have the rest of our organism, in fact, we would be very spiritual and yet only a spiritualized animal. The head can never feel human on its own without being inspired to feel this. It points us back to ancient Saturn, Sun, and Moon phases of evolution, whereas the rest of our organism points back only to ancient Moon, and in fact only its later period. It attached itself to the head, and in this respect is really like a kind of parasite upon it. Picture this. The head was once the whole human being, having extension organs underneath it, by means of which it nourished itself. It was a very odd entity. But as it evolved further, and the openings below developed by closing off from what was around them, no longer serving as organs of nutrition or connecting the head with influences emanating from the surroundings, the head ossified above, and the rest of the organism became necessary. This other part of the physical organism only emerged at a time when there was no further possibility for the rest of animal life to emerge. You will say that it is hard to conceive of what I have just described. I can only reply by saying that you have to make an effort to conceive it. The world is not as simple as people think, or as they like to imagine, so that they do not have to think too hard about it. In this respect, we can experience all the ways in which people insist on making the world as easy as possible to understand, often displaying the oddest views. There is a wealth of literature on the philosophy of Kant, by all sorts of huge admirers of his. But this is only because people fail to understand other philosophers, and find that trying to understand Kant himself is already enough of an effort. And since he is, after all, a great philosopher, and also considers himself to be very brilliant, a great genius, as people so often do, they never get beyond his view of things to engage with others. In fact, people only regard Kant as a great philosopher because they find it so hard to understand him. There is a connection here with the reluctance people feel to acknowledge the full complexity of the world and to make the effort to understand it. We have previously spoken of these things from the most diverse perspectives. When my lectures on title Occult Physiology come out, you will be able to read in detail of embryological proofs of the nonsense of saying that the brain evolves from the spinal column. The reverse is true. While the brain is a metamorphosis of a former spinal column, today's spinal column only developed as a secondary attachment to the modern brain. We have to learn to see that something similar in us arose later than what appears more complex, that what is more primitive in nature, that lies at a subordinate level, arose at a later stage. I have digressed here to talk about the duality in human nature, only so that you can understand its consequences, which include the fact that our inner life, developing, of course, under corporeal conditions, is also informed by this duality. Besides the physical, organic development of our head and that of the rest of our organism, we also have two different tempi, two speeds in our soul development. Our head develops relatively fast, while the process of development for the rest of our organism, which I will here call heart development, is slower in comparison, roughly 3 to 4 times slower. The determining factors in the head's development are usually more or less concluded by the time we are in our 20s. As far as our head is concerned, we are all already old by the time we are 20. And it is only because reinvigoration comes from the rest of our organism, which develops 3 or 4 times more slowly, that we go on living in a reasonable way. Our head development happens quickly. Our heart development, the development of the rest of our organism, takes 3 to 4 times longer. And our experience exists in this duality. In childhood and youth, our head development can absorb a great deal, which is why we learn so fast at that period of our lives. But what is absorbed during that time has to be continually renewed and refreshed, has to be encompassed repeatedly by the slower passage of the rest of our organism in its heart development. Now, just consider this. If education is, as it currently is in our age, focusing only on the development of head capacities, because in education we only accord the head its full dues, the consequence of this is that the head is integrated into the slower development of the rest of the organism like a dead entity. Thus it holds back the latter's development, and people become prematurely old in their soul. This phenomenon of premature inner aging is largely connected with our educational system. This is not an easy thing to remedy, nor can we sum up in a few words what needs to happen to address the problem. Almost everything in education would have to be done differently, so that it becomes something that not only addresses the memory and available to recall, but something which refreshes and renews us. So many people today, when they think back to their school days, to what their teachers told them, really only remember being instructed how they should do things. Very few indeed can immerse themselves repeatedly in the vivid experiences of their youth, lovingly recalling every hand movement, every remark, their teacher's tone of voice, the feelings that permeated the lessons they received. Very few can find in such things an ever-renewing source that refreshes and reinvigorates them. This is connected with the different tempi which we can experience within us. The quicker development of the head, which concludes in our 20s, and the slower course of heart development of the rest of our being, which can nourish us for the rest of our lives. What we must not do is merely give the head what is due to it, but also give it something that the rest of the organism can draw refreshing powers from repeatedly throughout the rest of a person's life. To achieve this, it is necessary, for instance, that all lessons, all subjects are imbued with a certain artistic element. The artistic element is out of fashion today. People believe that cultivating the imagination, which is certainly something that lifts us above daily reality, will make teaching too far-flung and pie in the sky. There is no inclination today, therefore, to pay heed to this secret of life. We need only consider specific areas where what I am referring to still exists. It does still exist here and there. And we will find that something like this can be achieved by virtue, especially of people becoming human beings once more. A great deal is necessary for this to happen, and there is one thing I would like to emphasize in this respect. Nowadays, those who wish to become teachers are tested to see if they know their subjects properly. What is discovered really by this means? Only, usually, that the person concerned once crammed into his head the information he needed to pass his exams, gathering this from a great quantity of books, and thus acquiring knowledge he might need for his teaching. In fact, there is no need to acquire such knowledge. What we ought to discover to test someone's capacity to teach is whether the person concerned has a heart and a mind, whether what flows in his veins will enable him gradually to develop a relationship with children in school. Knowledge is not what we should examine, but the degree to which a future teacher is fully human. I am aware that there will only be one or two responses to such a suggestion. Either that the person proposing such a thing is off his head and does not live in the real world, or that this is something that already happens, is something everybody desires anyway. My reason for elaborating on this is firstly to cast a certain light on life, but then also to illumine something always felt subliminally, but which is so hard to lift up into the conscious soul. And yet it is something the human soul yearns for today, and will increasingly long for in the future. We need in our souls something of the energy that can continually renew our powers of soul, so that we do not grow weary as life continues, but always find in us a source of hope. Then we can feel how every day brings a new beginning. We ought not to grow inwardly old. This is vital. If you look around you today to see relatively young people, both men and women, who are inwardly already so terribly old, so unwilling, really, to regard each new day as a gift given them, as it was given in the freshness and vigor of their childhood or the first flush of youth. When we see this, we know what is needed, what a spiritual culture needs to give. And ultimately it is true to say that the feeling I am speaking of here, this feeling of never, ever, ever fading hope in life, fits us to create the right feeling relationship between the living and the so-called dead. Otherwise, what ought to provide a foundation for our relationship with the dead remains too stuck in memory. We merely remember what we experienced with the person who is now dead. But if we are unable to relive feelings associated with what we experienced with a person who has now departed physically, we will not have such a strong sense or intimation of the need to understand that the dead soul is now present only as a being of spirit, who must act as spirit. If our hope and trust in life has grown dull, so that we cannot refresh and reinvigorate ourselves, we no longer have a full sense of the transformation that has taken place. Previously, the person's presence in our life had a renewing effect, but now only his spirit can come to our aid. But we can approach this spirit if we develop the feeling of ever-renewed life forces that continually give our hope and trust in life fresh vigor. Here I would like to make a remark that could seem strange to you. A healthy life, healthy especially in the sense described here, will never lead us to regard life as something we are weary of. A life lived in a really healthy way will lead us, when we are older, to the desire to begin this life again, anew, and afresh each day. It is not healthy to think, once grown old, thank God life is nearly over. At the age of 40 or 50, one feels instead that one would like to go back and start the whole thing all over again. And it is healthy if we acquire a wisdom that comforts us by showing that although we cannot do so in this life, in a future life we will be able to remedy and redress what was imperfect in this one. It is healthy to look back on what we have experienced without regretting any of it, without wishing anything had not happened, and to find the wisdom that teaches us that we can wait for another life, for things not vouchsafed to us in this one. This is trust, real trust in life, founded on the hopefulness about life that we manage to keep alive. Thus we cultivate the feelings that ensoul our life in the right way, and at the same time build a bridge between the living in this realm and the living in the other. These feelings are gratitude for the life we receive, trust in the experiences we have, an intimate sense of togetherness, the capacity to keep our hopes in life alive and fresh. These are inner ethical impulses which, intimated in the right way, also provide the very best outward social ethic, because ethical conduct, like historical understanding, can, as I described in the public lecture, only be grasped by fathoming it in the subconscious. Something else I would like to raise is the difference it makes to a relationship if two people are physically embodied, or if one of them is physically embodied and the other not, or if neither of the two souls are at present in corporeal embodiment. This is something particular I want to say in this regard. There is something particular I want to say in this regard. If we study the human I, capital, and life of soul, the latter can also be called the astral body, and the I, as I have often said, is the youngest part of our organization, the baby, if you like, whereas the astral body is somewhat older, though it originated only in the ancient moon phase of evolution. We ascertain the following. They have not yet developed sufficiently to give us the power, if we relied on these aspects only, to sustain ourselves as independent entities in relation to other people. If each of us here were, together with the others, only as I and astral body, without our etheric and physical bodies, we would all merge in a sort of mush. Our beings would flow through each other. Instead of being distinct and separate, we would not know how to distinguish ourselves from the others. No one would be able to know which was his hand or leg and which that of another, though of course this comparison is at odds with the fact that arms and legs would not figure here at all. But feelings too could not be discerned as belonging to one person rather than another. Then that we can sense our separateness is due to the fact that each person here is detached from the whole fluid mass, which is an accurate picture of a former condition, in the form of a drop. But so that all the souls do not run together again into one, we can imagine that every soul drop has entered a piece of sponge that keeps each separate from the others. Something like this is actually what has happened. Only by virtue of inhabiting physical bodies and etheric bodies are we properly distinct and separate from each other. When asleep, we are only separate from one another by retaining a strong desire for our own physical body. This desire, ardently directed toward our physical body, separates us in sleep, for otherwise we would flow entirely into each other when asleep. Sensitive souls might find it a very uncomfortable thought if they knew how closely they connect in sleep with the inner being of others in their surroundings. But this is not too extreme compared to the conditions that would exist if this ardent longing for one's own physical body did not keep us related to it while we are physically embodied. Now, we can ask this. What separates our souls from each other in the period between death and a new birth? During life, our I and astral body belong to an etheric and physical body. And after death, our I and astral body belong, similarly, to a quite specific realm of stars, different in every individual case. An instinct for this gives us the idea of a guiding star, particular to each person. In terms of physical projection, the realm of stars is spherical, and can therefore contain the most varied divisions. These areas overlap, but each one belongs to a different person. To put it in terms of the psyche, each of us belongs to a different range of archangeloi and angeloi that live with the souls belonging to them. Here on earth, each person apparently has his own physical body. You may be surprised that I say apparently, quite intentionally, for there is a mystery involved here that I do not wish to broach at present, though I have studied it fully in the same way that I can say that every person has his own star configuration, but that these overlap. Imagine a certain group of archangeloi and angeloi in the life between death and rebirth. If only a single one of these is replaced by another, this creates the domain of a different soul. In the drawing, two souls have the same star configuration apart from a single star that they do not share. No two souls can have an exactly identical realm of stars. Between death and rebirth, souls are individualized by virtue of each having his own realm of stars, and this makes the distinction between each. Here, in the physical world, we are distinct in physical terms, as we know. Each of us has his own encompassing skin and views the world from this vantage point. Everything that approaches us must do so via the physical body. And similarly, between death and rebirth, everything that enters a soul is connected with the distinct realm of stars to which the I and astral body relate. This tells us how we remain distinct from each other after death. Today I have described how we can create a bridge between the so-called dead and the living by developing certain feelings in the soul. What I have just said now, too, can draw toward us thoughts, let us say feeling thoughts or thinking feelings, that likewise help to create this bridge. Whatever we experience, we can try increasingly to develop a mode of feeling that is motivated to ask how a particular dead person would experience the same thing, at the same time imagining that the soul in question is sharing in it alongside us. If we can do this very vividly, in a sense we are imitating the way in which the dead interact, either with the living or with each other. We are relating the individual gift of different star configurations to the mutual soul connection between us. We are imitating what lives in the interplay between one soul and the other through different star configurations. Concentrating on something of direct interest to us via the presence of the dead soul, and feeling the dead person to be with us in an immediate living connection, then we can increasingly sense the dead really approaching us more nearly. Here we must have trust that such things can happen. You see, if we do not trust, if we are impatient with life, this impatience drives such experiences away, clouds our perceptions. Nothing is worse than to cloud our vision with impatience.